On this episode of the Athletic Potential Podcast, we'll be discussing the main injuries outside of elbow and shoulder injuries in baseball and softball. Welcome to the Athletic Potential Podcast, your place to come and get answers to your athletic development questions. We cover a range of topics, all related to helping you to achieve your athletic goals so that you can experience and enjoy the athletic career that you deserve. I am your host, Dr. Mike Matthews. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Athletic Potential Podcast. Excited that you're here with us again today. We are excited for today's podcast and the topic we're going to discuss. Interesting question that I received. One of the questions I normally get all the time is, as a physical therapist and rehab specialist that sees a lot of baseball, softball athletes, they assume that predominantly what we're going to see is shoulders and elbows. And the actuality, that's actually pretty true. I always like to get those questions and I go, hey, let's look back at yesterday's schedule and the schedule before that. I had a cool realization that actually half my clients, both those days, were elbow or shoulder type clients in the sense that we were rehabbing back from an injury or surgeries. But the interesting part was the rest of those clients, the other half or so, the majority of those clients were what we're going to be discussing today, all dealing with very similar things. And so I was a little shocked to see that the injuries weren't more spread out, but it bodes well with the question that I got the other day. And so we're going to jump right into that question and see if we can dive deep and maybe give some good information in regards to maybe how to help decrease the chances of injury in this area. This question comes from Mark. Mark asks, as a rehab specialist or physical therapist who sees baseball players a lot, what injuries outside of elbow and shoulder do you typically see, and what are ways to decrease those injuries from happening? I feel like we do a lot of arm exercises and shoulder and forearm exercises to decrease the risk of ligament injuries and tendon injuries in the elbow and the shoulder, but uncertain as to what we should also focus on outside of those two things. So we can go to the research on this, and I can tell you right now that depending on the research study you look at, the predominant injury, and we're going to stick to baseball and then I'll switch a little bit to softball, but the predominant injury that we're going to see outside of elbow, shoulder injuries and throwers is either going to then shift over to hamstring injuries. We see a lot of hamstring injuries in baseball players. The main one that I would argue that we see and we have been seeing, as I alluded to earlier, is our back injuries and essentially back pain in throwers. And if you look at the softball data, actually hamstring injuries and those other type of injuries are way less compared to back injuries. So number one injury in softball is shoulder. The second most commonly injured thing in softball, according to at least one research study, was low backs, and then elbows, to be honest. And let's talk about low back pain in throwers. And so predominantly when we see these type of back pains, it's because of repetition, right? I think we got to dispel and maybe shift gears away from when people think low back pain, they're thinking, oh, somebody bent over to pick something up and then, their back locked up and they went into spasm or whatever, and they couldn't stand up again, or you blew a disc or those type of things. And those things do happen in baseball and softball players. But if you look at the nature of baseball and softball injuries, which is important to answer your question, it's a law of repetitive motions, essentially. And that is, the more you're going to do a specific motion and the more you're going to do it at high speeds and high intensities, the more often than not you're going to start taking structures that are not either used to doing that movement or not equipped mechanically, structurally to handle that movement. And then they'll slowly either adapt or they'll wear out, one or the other. And when we talk about low back injuries, one of the most common injuries that we see, especially in adolescents, that would be anybody with open growth plates and who is going through growth phases, though it does happen in adults, but we see it a lot in adolescents, are these things called pars defects or pars fractures, stress fractures of the back, that can lead to all sorts of other names. We always hear this spondylolisthesis, a lot of these spondy injuries, and we've talked about this on a podcast before, but without getting too technical or nerdy on it, essentially what happens is because the spine is rotating, and we're going to talk about the lower lumbar spine. When I say back injuries and back pain, I should just say lower back pain, because these injuries are happening in the lower spine. I think just above the hip bones, put your hands on your hips, the pain is usually where your thumbs would meet or a little higher. And with the rotational aspect of throwing and hitting, the lumbar spine, you have to understand, we look at range of motions in the lumbar spine. So how much can it move and all those type of things? Let's go over that really quickly. So I'm going to summarize kind of some of the research that we've looked at and mainly the data that we've collected. in adolescence. But if we look at how far someone can flex forward in their lumbar spine, okay, on average, it's going to be around 60 degrees, okay? So they can flex forward 60 degrees. And then we ask them to extend backwards, so lean back over the top. We're looking around 30 to 40 degrees, okay? A lot of debate on that one, but 30 to 40 degrees. And again, I know if you're like a hypermobile person, you get a ton more, and if you're not, then you get less. But in general, okay, so you get about 30 to 40 degrees of extension. If we look at left side bending, so that would be you trying to take your left shoulder to the ground sideways, straight down to the side bending. It's about 40 degrees, 45 degrees. And then if you went to the other side, another 40, 45 degrees. Now, rotation is where I really want to cover this, because I think this is why we see a lot of these injuries, right? And that is when we go to rotate our spine, if you look at from full rotation, this would mean not just from center to left, that would mean from far left to far right. You're on average looking at about anywhere from 16 to 25 degrees of rotation. I want to emphasize this again. If you bend forward, you get 60, 6-0. If you bend backward, you get 30 to 40, 30, 40, right? Total rotation, you get maybe 20, 20 total rotation. So we're talking about rotation in a lumbar spine that does not actually rotate that much. It is not built to rotate. If you look at the structures and how the joints and the vertebrae and are all built, they are not built to rotate. They're built to take on compression, and they're built to take on flexion and extension. And we look at the nature of baseball and softball, the nature of throwing in general. This is anything where we have to rotate hard and quick. You look at hockey, you look at lacrosse, you look at javelin, those type of things. Anytime we're doing that, especially when our feet are planted in the ground, you're going to see rotation that's going to happen. And then in combination with that, you're going to see extension that's also going to happen. So they're going to rotate and extend, which is really going to beat up the back side of the spine where those joints are. And when we talk about PARS, it's called a PARS, PARS defect. It's where the joint is located on the vertebrae. What happens is as you extend and rotate, it essentially just beats it down, and it beats it until the bone weakens to the point where a fracture happens or a fracture line happens, and that progresses over time. A lot of time, these injuries, clients come in to say, my back's just been sore and ornery for a little while now. And when I say a little while, it's 2 months. And they'll come and say, I'm like sore and ornery for the last 2 months, and I'm not quite sure why. And I tell them, I go, what were you doing? Tell me these things. He's like, we've been ramping up in baseball. I've been throwing a lot more. A softball player may come in and be like, look, yeah, we just started really taking swings. I've been pitching more now. And so now volumes have doubled to tripled. They said, my back has gotten sore, and it just really hasn't gotten better. And a lot of times these things will get so bad that they'll just say, look, I can't do this anymore. It hurts too bad to even stand and walk. If I try to rotate it, it almost feels like an electric shock in my lower back. And I always tell them that's unfortunate. And then the first and foremost test, which I tell nobody to do unless you're a rehab professional, is you have them lay in their stomach, and then you essentially push them into extension with their laying down. And if it immediately produces their pain, I'm typically telling my clients, look, if you're my kid or if you're me, what I'm doing is I'm getting an image. I like images on this only because I want to know the status of the bone. If the bone has a current fracture line that shows active response, we can get into details on that in the imaging. If it has, that indicates it's an active process, meaning that it either just happened or it's been trying to continually heal for a while. If it doesn't have that and it seems to be less active but more painful, that means you may have been dealing with it for a while. Crazy study that they did, and I wish I could quote studies like some of my friends can, but they did a study where they looked at those PARS defects and how they developed. And actually, they just took a whole subset of this population, and it was a younger population. And what they realized is that there was probably a third of the population that had these developing PARS, either full fracture line developing. They look at it, it's a different signal under the image. It looks different under the image. And what they found was that they had a third of these clients had a developing or a current PARS defect, but no symptoms. So they didn't even know they had a problem, but they have a potential PARS defect, which basically means that they were compensating or had no problem maintaining that position, but they had beat up their spines. Then they had a subset of the population that had symptomatic spines, and they all had it. And I bring that up only because I like a baseline. I want to know where it's at, because the key with PARS defects, and we talked about this in a previous podcast, and that is structure dictates function and function influences structure. And that is, if I know where it's at, I basically can start putting a timeline on when that athlete can return. Unfortunately for these things, a lot of time they require time off. And time off basically means time off. Like you can't extend or rotate, which if you're playing baseball or softball, that's everything you need to do in that sport. And so you're out of that sport. At least you're watching the games. It's unfortunate. And then typically it's a restriction of movement, excuse me, meaning they don't want you bending, they don't want you lifting, twisting, rotating, all of those things. And a lot of times, also interesting study is that if you get diagnosed with this on the eastern part of the United States, there's a pretty decent chance you're going to be put in a brace. They call it the Boston back brace. You can Google it if you want. But if you're on the East Coast, they seem to get it. On the West Coast and the Midwest, it doesn't seem to be as prevalent of use to back brace these clients. But basically you're on restriction anywhere from essentially 2 months to 5 months, 2 to 5 months, I think it was. 4 months was the ideal. They found the average be around 2 to 5 months. And I know I just killed everybody's spring, whoever has this, if you came to me in March, right? And almost all of your summer. But that's what it's going to take because you need that bone to heal. And once that bone is demonstrating signs of healing and you give it the plenty of time to heal, then you can start back into activity. Mark, I know you kind of asked me this question of what are the most common things we see outside of elbow and shoulder and throwers. Backs are by far the most. This is the most common back injury that we see. And unfortunately, it's a big nasty one in the sense that it takes a long time to get back to sport. Although the research is pretty good, 80% return to the same level of competition in multiple studies. And so you can get back from sport, although it looks like you're going to be taking quite a bit of time off. To answer the second part of your question, Mark, about, okay, so what do we need to do about this, right? How do we keep these things from happening in our athletes? I can tell you the answer is the same in regards to how do we help our athletes not get hurt with their elbows and the shoulders. This is a proper ramp up over time. And I know you asked about exercises, Mark, but I can tell you right now, exercises are helpful. But if you have a proper ramp up progression over time, then what happens is those structures that are getting stressed, they're not getting so stressed that they can't keep up. I would say, so if you're out skateboarding or whatever and you fall and you abrase your palms, right? You cut up your palms because you fell down and you cut up your palms, right? If you give your palms enough time, they're going to heal. And then if you go out to do it again, fall down again, the first time never happened. And they get scuffed up again. But if you scuff up your palms, give it 2 days, they're still all scuffed up, and you fall again, it's going to make it worse. So that time period that it takes for your palms to heal back to normal, and actually they get a little bit tougher after you do it, that is kind of the same concept of the throwing and hitting. The rotation stress of hitting and throwing is there, and it is there on backs. It happens to everyone's back. Not that everyone's back's going to break down or whatever. You just got to understand that as they start doing it more and more, you're going to start to see these backs kind of get beat up a little bit. And the key is that the progression is you've got a long enough runway that the progression doesn't overwhelm the spine. And if you do that, and it allows the palms to heal, allows the spine to build up the bone in that area, make it more robust, make it thick, so that when they do rotate more and more, they're more adept to handling more rotational stress. And so that just means a longer runway. And what I just said in practical terms is this. You finish your summer and say that athlete's played a lot of baseball, softball, a lot of throwing, a lot of hitting. There needs to be a downtime to give the whole body a chance to recover. Now, when I say downtime, I don't typically have our athletes stop throwing. I just take all their competitive throws away. I just say, hey, look, it's the end of November or just it's the end of October. Fall season's over if you're playing a fall season. And I'll argue there's some guys that throw and hit so much in the summer that they should never do a fall season. Like they should just take it off. Although continue to throw, continue to swing, okay? At a low level, at low intensity. We're not completely removing the stress because the stress actually helps the bones and everything to know how to heal and get stronger, but you remove the intensity and the volume. So you drop intensity down dramatically and you reduce the volume by half or more. And then what you do is you maintain that lower volume and very minimal intensity, and then you really increase the volume but not the intensity. And then once you've got volume to a certain level, then you increase intensity, and then both will rise together. Now you're back in season again. I just covered like 9 to 12 months of the year of how long that takes. Not that it takes 9 months to ramp up, but it should take around 3 to get back up to speed. Honestly, if you look at it, if you finish in October, end of October you finish, you take November and December and January to ramp up. That's 3 months-ish, because you may play your first tournament at the end of January, depending on if you're in junior college, you're already playing. A lot of softball teams start earlier. But the idea is that you may be ramping up during that time period, and that's good, okay? But there's a little bit of a downtime in the fall. My first answer for that is, look, you've got to give them a downtime, but you've also got to give them a long enough runway to build up the tolerance to swinging and throwing and the rotation and the extension. Now, second part. This is where everybody's like, yeah, core control, we need abs, we know all this kind of stuff. I can tell you right now, I do not, with full confidence can tell you, have not prescribed and do not prescribe crunches or sit-ups to my athletes, my throwing athletes. I just don't do it, okay? There's too much evidence in research out there suggesting that they are not effective at producing the muscular control in the abs and the obliques that we want. And I should say not as effective as producing the control of what we're looking for. And the second part is they do wear out structures that we want. That'd be your discs. Okay. I don't really like wearing out discs. I don't like stressing on our joints, our facet joints in the spine. I'd rather leave them healthy and controlled. So dispel that right now, Mark. If your athletes are doing crunches and sit-ups, I would tell you just to stop. Now, throwing athletes, just let me emphasize that. I got a lot of people be like, you don't do any crunches or sit-ups. I'll be honest, I've done a modified sit-up, but that's it. For my own training plus training of some of my other athletes that are non-throwers, yeah, I might do something like that, but that's only if the function dictates it. I can tell you, my older clients, no way. I'm not doing it at all. If not crunches and sit-ups, what do you do? This is the plank family, okay? I know everyone goes, oh, planks, man. I'll be honest, I don't enjoy doing planks as an athlete, although the benefits are tremendous. Let me give you just kind of the routine that I give all of our basic starting throwing athletes in regards to what they need to be doing with their core. Okay, here it is. Very simple. First and foremost, you're going to do an exercise called the plank on elbows. This looks like everybody's plain Jane normal variation of a plank. What I tell everybody is you've got to be in a straight line. And it is incredibly interesting how many kids can be anywhere from 16 and under, although 18 and under probably can happen too, that have no idea how to create a straight line between their shoulders and their toes when they're doing this exercise. They just don't know the concept of pelvic tilts. So I spent a lot of time on this. We ran a training group for 4.5 months. The first month and a half was literally teaching them how to plank, front plank and side plank. And we finally got most of them to do it, and we still had stragglers that really struggled with it. Okay, front plank, no longer than 15 seconds. There's no additional evidence suggesting that if you can do a 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute, whatever, training, when you're training, that those are beneficial. In my opinion, they're not. If you look at how our spine and our muscles work in our spine in regards to throwing, running, cutting, jumping, hitting, they're not working for a minute straight. They're working for around 4 to 8 seconds. That's it. I train at 15 seconds to make sure we cover our full range of time plus a little bit of endurance. Okay. And I train it very specifically in regards to sets and reps. Okay. So let's get the exercises, then I'll give you the sets and reps. First exercise, the plank on elbows. Make sure that you have a straight line between your shoulders. By the way, it includes your head, shoulders, and toes. Okay? Straight line. There should be no arcs in your back. There should be a straight line going right through ear, shoulder, hip, knee, ankle. Really, I shouldn't say toes, right? It's ankle, but that. Okay? That's the first exercise. Second exercise is a side plank. Everybody's least favorite exercise in the world. It is a tough exercise for a lot of people to do. You can do it on your knees if you would like. Okay. If you go to Athletic Potential on the YouTube channel, side plank and plank on elbows are all on there. Go look at them, see how we teach it. That's the best place to look in regards to how we teach it. So go there, just search it on the site. And then, so we do side planks. Okay. 15 seconds max per side. Okay. And then the third exercise that we've been doing more and more often, which is a variation of a plank, is bird dog, okay? That's where you're on hands and knees and you reach your right arm out and your left leg back. And then you switch. Left arm out, right leg back. Look it up on the YouTube, you'll see it. There are some people that really struggle with it, have no clue concept of how to do a bird dog. We'll switch to dead bugs at that point. That's where you're laying on your back. It's the same exact position, but you flip yourself over. So your hands are still in quadruped, but your hands are straight up. Your knees are up, but your knees are bent at 90. And then what you do is you extend your arm out with your left leg out. The reason why I like dead bugs for certain kids and athletes is that some people just quite literally can't control their spine well. And so in order to get the benefits of core training, until we can teach them to move their spine well, we are going to ask them to not have to control it because the ground will teach them what level actually is. So 3 exercises: front plank, side plank, bird dog, or dead bug. Here's how we train it. What you're going to do is you're going to start with a front plank, a plank on elbows, or a normal plank, okay? You're going to hold that for 10 seconds. I know I just said 15. I know. That's okay. I'm telling you what the normal sets and reps that I do for our athletes. You're going to hold it for 10 seconds. After 10 seconds, you're going to take a breath out. You're going to just lay down. You're going to go, and you're immediately back into the next one. It's a maximum of a 2-second rest. So you do 10 seconds. Again, 10 seconds. You're going to do it 6 times. Then you're going to rest for 20 seconds. Then you're going to do it 4 more times. So 4 sets of 10 seconds. Then you're going to rest 20 seconds. Then you're going to do 2 more sets of 10 seconds. All front plank first. Same exact sequence with side plank, all on one side. Okay, this is brutal, I'll be honest. Most people were starting at 4 sets, but just to say you can do all 6. You're going to get on your right side, 6 sets of 10 seconds with minimal rest in between each set. Then you're going to rest for 20 seconds, do 4 more sets of 10 seconds, rest for 20 seconds, do 2 more sets of 10 seconds, then switch to the other side, do the exact same thing. Guess what we're going to do in regards to the dead bug or the bird dog? Exact same thing. You're going to reach your arm out, leg out, you're going to hold that position 10 seconds, then you're going to come back up and you're going to switch. Other arm of the leg, 10 seconds. That counts. That counts as 2, not 1, 2. You're going to do that 60 times and then you're done. That is your core training for the day. I tell everybody if you are going to do these exercises, you do them after you are done doing everything else. Okay, I don't like doing these exercises before you go do baseball activities because we are hitting the same muscle group that's protecting your spine. Okay, so don't do those before. It's something that we do after or well after. All right, so Mark, I hope that helps in regards to what's the most common injury? Most common injury is back pain, lower back pain, typically a extension rotation component of that. We negate that through a long ramp up in regards to getting them back into their sport of throwing and hitting. And then we also help control those motions by having them control extension rotation using a front plank, a side plank, and a dead bug or bird dog in the sets and rep scheme that we just talked about. If you do those things, it's going to give your athletes a better chance of not developing it. I will say this, there's a component of mechanics that play a role into this. If you have somebody who has pretty terrible mechanics in throwing and hitting, they're going to put additional stress on their spine no matter what. Mechanics need to be standardized and improved, okay? That is a big component of this as well. All right? I hope that answered your question, Mark. I'll be honest, we are seeing a lot of athletes for this right now. It's a tough injury. Once you have it, it is tough to come back from. It takes a long time. And if you put the energy and the effort into it, there's a great chance, right? 8 out of 10 get back to the same level of sport as before, although it does take on average around 6 to 8 months to return. I hope that helps, Mark. And that's the only question we have for today on our podcast. I appreciate everybody coming out of the podcast today. I hope that helped everybody at least understand how we train the core, and maybe you can go ahead and just take that, implement that program with your athletes. If you do have questions in regards to that program, you can always reach out to us. Just shoot me an email, go to the website and shoot me an email. If you have questions for the podcast, please go to the website, click on the button and ask your question. We definitely want to answer those questions. We appreciate everybody taking the time to come out today. Listen to our podcast. Please tell your friends and rate and review. That'll help us get in front of more people. And until next time, thanks. Hey everybody, I just want to say thank you for listening to the Athletic Potential Podcast. If you do have questions for the podcast, please visit the website, www.athletic-potential.com/podcast. You'll find a button there to ask your question. Please input your information and your question, and we will answer any and all questions we get. And thank you again for listening. If you do get a chance, please rate and review the podcast. And until next time, thanks.